10 or 11, Newcastle, Hull, and same goes for Cardiff and Plymouth as well. But we could again reach 13 with the mild air in place. So much milder for the next few days. But then we are going to see this cold front swinging across the country on Thursday night, bringing a colder feel back by Friday. Bye for now.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 1st of February 2022 at 9:30 a.m. and you're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on GB News, on your radio, your TV and online. I'm standing in Downing Street again for what has been a momentous week so far. The Prime Minister, of course, is off in Ukraine today, but a cabinet meeting is taking place in the building behind me. And don't you worry, we'll be bringing you any news as it happens throughout the programme. So much to get through, but first, it's your headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good morning, it is 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date here on GB News. The Prime Minister is heading to Ukraine as the fallout over Partygate continues. Boris Johnson's going to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky to find a diplomatic solution to the looming threat posed by Russia. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss was also due to go, but will miss out after testing positive for coronavirus. The UK is providing tens of millions of pounds of new funding to shore up democracy in the country and to try to reduce reliance on Russian energy. Meanwhile, there have been renewed calls for Boris Johnson's resignation, despite his pledge to overhaul how he runs government. He apologised after the Sue Gray report into alleged Downing Street parties found failures of leadership and judgment. The Prime Minister says an updated version of the inquiry will be published after the police investigation is completed. A US judge has asked for help from British courts to try to obtain evidence from Prince Andrew's former assistant, Robert Olney. Judge Lewis A. Kaplan wants Olney to be questioned about communications that Prince Andrew had with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein and Virginia Giuffre, as well as his travel to Epstein's homes. Prince Andrew is being sued by Miss Giuffre, accused of sexual assault. He denies all of the allegations against him. The housing market is showing no signs of slowing down, with its strongest start to the year since 2005. According to Nationwide's index, annual growth increased to 11.2% in January, up from 10.4% in December. The average house price across the UK is now £255,000. Royal Mail is adding special QR codes to its stamps with the aim of connecting letters with the digital world. It follows a successful trial where customers can scan the codes on their phones, making it possible to watch videos, messages and personalised greetings from senders. Royal Mail says it's all part of a move to future-proof the service. You are now up to date here on GB News. Don't forget, we're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. I'll be keeping you up to date throughout the day. But now, let's head to Westminster for the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning. It's 9:33 this Tuesday morning, live from Downing Street. And what a week it has been. Only one day through so far, but already a rollercoaster ride for this Prime Minister and his fortunes. Of course, yesterday we saw that Sue Gray report, or at least a preliminary version of it, a rather stripped down Sue Gray report that was handed to Number 10, or rather emailed to Number 10 in the morning. Of course, the Prime Minister then at 3:30 faced questions in the Commons, a very hostile environment that was for him, and then a meeting with Conservative MPs a little bit later. Well, let's analyse the events of yesterday now with Christian Cowgie, the senior reporter from the Guido Fawkes website, who joins me here live in Downing Street. And Christian, it's your analysis that the Prime Minister is in a slightly better state now than he was yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, well, he certainly was in a better state late last night. The question session in the Commons had almost upended the boat, actually. The mood responding to, obviously, those Jimmy Savile allegations, the response on a question about drug taking, which he then threw back to the Leader of the Opposition, went down like a plate of cold sick with Tory MPs. His performance later in the evening substantially warmed them back up to him. He made major promises on a potential reshuffle. I presume that will be mainly focusing on the Whip's office. Promises about heavy involvement in policy making by the backbenches, a major contrition, and it started off quite cold and massively warmed up towards the end, where there was a lot more laughter, a lot more banging of tables, and the mood in Parliament, in the Tory party by the end of the day was actually the Downing Street operation had got them to as solid a place as could have been hoped for after the initial release of the Sue Gray findings.
This is fascinating then. The situation where the Prime Minister was behaving in public, if you like, in the House of Commons, watched by, we presume, many people across the country, was his weak performance. But then behind closed doors to the parliamentary party was a much stronger performance. But I suppose it doesn't really matter how many people watched each event, because ultimately his future is in the hands of those few MPs, not the many out in the country, at least for now.
Yeah, one critical MP told me that the Prime Minister had won over the electorate that matters in the short term, the Tory MPs, but damaged things further with the electorate that matters in the longer term, the general public. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Tory MPs might review the performance as saying Boris has never been particularly good in the Commons. You know, despite being a charismatic guy, having a good sense of humour, he's always struggled in that particular arena. So whilst it was on the bad side of a Boris performance, it might have been expected, although there are of course rumours that an advisor explicitly said do not mention the Jimmy Savile allegation, and that is now one of the fallouts that they're having to deal with, although some might say that particularly odd and contentious debate is slightly more preferable than treading the Partygate even further into the day.
Well, not to get too conspiratorial here, but there is that phrase, the dead cat, a phrase invented by Sir Linton Crosby, the strategist who has advised David Cameron and Boris Johnson to their election victories. And a dead cat is when you sort of invent another situation, whack it out on the table, and that changes the conversation. This morning, a lot of the interviews were about Jimmy Savile more so than parties in the building behind us. Could this potentially have been a dead cat strategy?
I think that overestimates the comms strategy of this particular Downing Street administration. I'm slightly worried to carry on mentioning dead cats, given Larry's crawling around us somewhere. But of course, there is a bigger distraction coming down the road, which is, of course, Ukraine, and that is something that actually makes Tory MPs quite happy with the Downing Street administration. Obviously, Boris is now flying out. Liz just can't because she managed to get COVID. So really, the Downing Street operation will be very keen that it is Ukraine that dominates. And really, I think the strategy now is hoping that this delay until the Met findings actually just creates a real sense of fatigue amongst Tory MPs, so that by the time the Met findings and potentially the next Sue Gray update come out in 4, 5, 6 weeks, they're really hoping that at that point they're just like, they want to move on, they don't care, everyone's tired, and he can get on with these Downing Street reforms that were promised yesterday and get on with governing.
There was a lot of consternation on even the Conservative Party side about the Prime Minister's reluctance to release the full Sue Gray report once the Met Police investigation has concluded. Well, late last night, Number 10 seemed to put out a clarifying statement saying that they would, after all, ask Sue Gray to complete that body of work and would publish it. Why did it take so long for Downing Street to finally get to that position?
Well, now Dominic Raab seems to have rode back slightly on the Today programme. He's saying he's not sure there's going to be any update for them to publish, which seems incredibly unlikely. It's a really frustrating sort of blood out of a stone situation with this government. You know, there are plenty of people who say the best thing is just sunlight is the best way to deal with this. Get it all out there, because the handling has often been criticised more than the actual Partygate amongst the Tory MPs, and this is a prime example. Get it out, don't prevaricate, let people see what the issue is and deal with it and move on. And instead now we've got a process row which is going to drag on for 4, 5, 6 weeks, which may involve them trying to cover things up, and then the opposition or a leaky member of Downing Street are going to get it out into the public anyway, and then they're going to have to answer questions about why they tried covering up. So it is just a better strategy to get it all out there in the first place.
It's interesting, the whole atmosphere in the Commons yesterday. Keir Starmer struck a very quiet tone. He didn't try and do the bolshy punch and Judy politics that we've come to expect at Prime Minister's questions, for example. He even reached out to potential Tories by quoting approvingly Margaret Thatcher in that exchange. Did Keir Starmer get the tone right and Boris get the tone wrong?
Yeah, I've already said Boris got the tone wrong at the question session, and Starmer did what he does best, which is very, very solemn, sincere, parochial soliloquies. But I also think, Starmer has been playing this character for 3-4 weeks now. It's going down quite well inside the bubble, and a lot of journalists seem that's the right thing. I thought was very interesting is a lot of observers, the commentariat, thought Starmer overwhelmingly won the last Prime Minister's questions, but actually focus groups of ordinary people thought Boris won it. And there does seem to be a discrepancy between what Starmer is doing and getting plaudits for in Westminster, and what Boris is doing, which seems to overall go down better with the rest of the country, and Tory MPs are going to try and hope that is definitely the case going forward.
Well, a really interesting set of analysis there. Thank you very much, Christian Calvi, for joining us here. Larry is actually just crawling behind you. Speaking of dead cats, let's hope that is not another one to add to the tally. Christian Calvi of the Guido Fawkes website, thank you for joining us this morning. Well, something else that happened in the House of Commons last night was a question. Well, not last night, yesterday afternoon even, a question raised by Michael Fabricant to the Prime Minister. He spoke approvingly of the Prime Minister's plan to set up an office of the Prime Minister, a new structure within Downing Street to prevent issues like Partygate happening again. Here's what he had to say.
Michael Fabricant.
President Truman had on his desk, "The buck stops here." So the Prime Minister was right to apologise for the events that happened in Number 10 Downing Street. 2 weeks ago, I reminded Tom Harwood that Tony Blair suggested that there should be an Office of Prime Minister so that it could be governed not from 70 Whitehall, but from the building itself. Could the Prime Minister tell me how he envisions the office will work? Will the Permanent Secretary be based in Number 10, controlling what civil servants do in Number 10?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, very grateful. I think the House does understand, even if many people outside don't, that Number 10 actually hosts about more than 400 officials on a busy day. They have a huge amount to do, and we need to make sure. No, Mr. Speaker, they're working very hard. That's what they're doing.
When you come from there, you can't always see.
The Prime Minister there speaking to Michael Fabricant yesterday in the House of Commons. Now, I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised to hear my name enter Hansard there in the Commons. It was a strange moment as I was sitting up in the press gallery. But let's remind ourselves of that conversation that I had with Michael Fabricant about 2 weeks ago on this programme, where Michael Fabricant suggested the creation of this office of the Prime Minister that now the Prime Minister has said he'll establish. Welcome to the programme. Now, a lot of people won't understand exactly the structure of how Downing Street operates at the moment. Could you run through what the problem is with this whole Cabinet Office situation and why a separate office of the Prime Minister might be better?
Yes, I mean, a lot of these news stories coming out about drinking parties are actually nothing to do with the political team or Prime Minister. It now turns out that it was civil servants drinking, and we know that, for example, on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, one of them was a going-away party, and, you know, at the time, Boris was 40 miles away in Chequers, and the Prime Minister wouldn't have known about it because it was at a sort of junior level within the civil service. Now, the problem is this. For years and years and years, the people who work in Downing Street, the civil servants, are part of the Cabinet Office. And the Cabinet Office is some way away in Whitehall. And all the senior management are in Whitehall, which is a separate building. And I can tell you that if you have a pass to go to the Cabinet Office, it doesn't get you into Downing Street, let alone into the building. So what I'm arguing for is an idea that actually Tony Blair came up with and failed. And what Tony Blair's idea was that there should be an Office of Prime Minister, as you said. And why would that make a difference? It would mean that the senior civil servant management team would actually be based in Downing Street. Because Downing Street, in a way, operates almost as a separate fiefdom, independent of the Cabinet Office, even though all the civil servants, and I think the special advisors too, are all paid for and report to rules for the Cabinet Office in a separate building. So it needs tighter controls, because it's quite clear that both in Downing Street and maybe in the civil service as a whole, and frankly, listening to what you were saying earlier on, I suspect businesses too, you know, had their own interpretation of what the rules should be.
So it's your argument here that the Prime Minister doesn't have enough control over the operation of the civil service, particularly when it comes to doing Downing Street business?
I would go further and say that the civil service itself doesn't have enough control over what goes on in Downing Street, because it is a separate building, because there isn't easy connections between the Cabinet Office. There is actually a secret tunnel, which I've been through, but you pass an armed guard and you have to have a very special pass to do it. But for all intents and purposes, it's a completely separate building. And the whole thing is becoming conflated now with what Boris Johnson attended, that garden party, which we all so famously know about, and other parties that were going on, which the opposition quite naturally are dancing up and down with glee about, suggesting that these all were attended by Boris Johnson, when in fact it's quite clear that, as I say, junior civil servant events, why would he know?
Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Fabricant, someone who seems to be rather influential over this operation of Downing Street because, of course, his idea of this new Office of Prime Minister has now been committed to by the Prime Minister. Welcome to the programme, Michael. Did you have any discussions with the Prime Minister about this over the last couple of weeks?
No, I haven't. And in fact, I think it's something that was being discussed anyway. But at least we can say that GB News got the story first, 2 weeks ahead of all other broadcasters. So well done on that.
And you mentioned that Tony Blair had pursued this idea as well, trying to unify the structure of management within the building, or should I say buildings behind me. I think it's probably a good idea to show the audience just what Downing Street looks like. Of course, the gates have sealed off this street from the public since the late 1980s. But if we start over in the far end of the street with number 12, that red brick building, that of course connects through to number 11, above which the Prime Minister's flat is. We go right across to number 10, that famous shining black door. But then also, all the way round number 9 Downing Street is the building in the far end where the press briefings are. It's got a bit of a white front and it connects to the rest of Whitehall as well. And of course, between number 10 and number 9, there's this sprawling complex that all connects to one another as well in various different ways. About 400 people working across the street. Behind me, a very big set of offices, not quite the small house that you can sometimes imagine when just seeing that one front door. Actually, as I stand out there, we're just seeing some people walk out of that front door. There's been a cabinet meeting this morning, particularly with regards to the situation in Ukraine. Well, let's get back to Michael Fabricant now. How would this Office of the Prime Minister, in your eyes, work?
Well, as I said to you 2 weeks ago, really, the idea is it's a medium-sized department anyway, having, 400 people working there. So it's pretty strange, actually, that we haven't had this before. The idea would be that you would have the senior management of the department being based at number 10. And as you quite rightly point out, it is a massive complex. And what you couldn't show in your picture just now was how far deep it goes. Because, in fact, there are a whole series of buildings before you get to the infamous garden. So they would be based there. But it's interesting, you mentioned, as I'd mentioned, that it was Tony Blair's original idea. He had 2 ideas, I recall, both of which he didn't manage to actually produce. One was the Office of Prime Minister, which our Prime Minister, Boris, is now going to implement. The second thing was he wanted a prime ministerial jet. And I remember at the time it was being nicknamed Blair Force One. He didn't get that, but Boris already has got that, so he's delivering.
It's interesting when we're talking about an Office of the Prime Minister, a prime ministerial jet. These all sound rather American. And is there a valid criticism here that we're moving away from cabinet government, establishing the Prime Minister's office as the primary form of government? Does that detract too much from the sort of collective responsibility and cabinet government that this country was founded on? Of course, a cabinet meeting taking place as we speak. Shouldn't that be the body that makes the decisions rather than the Prime Minister in and of himself?
Well, I think in practice what happens is that a number of decisions are made in sub-cabinet committees, of which there are as many members, including the Prime Minister, and then it's brought before Cabinet as a whole. Look, this is something that has evolved over time. John Whittingdale was saying last night at a meeting I attended, I can't say what, otherwise I'd be giving the game away, that when he worked for Margaret Thatcher, it was a very, very small team indeed. And then Tony Blair produced a much, much larger organisation. But, I think it's needed, but it can go wrong. Where you don't get control from the top of the civil servants, an ethos develops, and we've heard about these suitcases of wine being brought in. Why they don't just have a bar at number 10, I don't know. But anyway, we've heard the story about people going to the local co-op or the local Tesco and getting the wine. But this isn't anything new. I mean, this happened under Theresa May, this happened under David Cameron, and I'm reliably informed it happened under Gordon Brown as well. Now, that's not to say that, there were the great drunken orgies, as the press like to make out. It's people having a very quiet drink after a hard week on a Friday evening when the boss is away, because most of the time, of course, the boss, whoever that boss happens to be, is in Chequers or in the constituency. So it's pushing it a bit to accuse Boris of being aware of everything that went on.
Well, Michael, thank you for your time this morning. Really interesting discussion there, and I'm really glad that we got to show some of the bits that you don't normally see about Downing Street as well. Well, of course, the Prime Minister isn't here in Downing Street today. He's flying off to Ukraine to meet the President of that country in Kiev, where he'll be talking about the situation. Of course, the President of Ukraine this morning, or the Prime Minister of Ukraine this morning, promised that he would expand the Ukrainian army size to by 100,000 troops. That would match the 100,000 troops that Russia has on the border. Well, let's discuss this whole situation now with Sam Armstrong of the Henry Jackson Society. Sam, the Prime Minister in Ukraine, weakened at home, will he be able to make a difference by showing solidarity and support between the UK and Ukraine?
Yes, well, it's amazing. At the moment, Boris's perception at home could not be further removed from his perception abroad. Ukraine has welcomed the government's decision to send arms, particularly anti-tank weapons, to Ukraine, and has called the UK one of its strongest allies, the one that is going further and doing more and more. So this is undoubtedly going to be a very good trip for the Prime Minister. I think he's going to enjoy it because the Ukrainian government could not be more grateful to him and his support. That said, he's already sent them the anti-tank missiles. So now the question comes is, what can the UK do next? Two big things. Firstly, sanctions, and secondly, further arms supplies. And the big question is, which rabbit is the PM going to pull out of his hat while he's there?
Now, we heard yesterday in the House of Commons Liz Truss, before she went into isolation with COVID, of course, talking about a new sanctions regime for the United Kingdom. Will this be enough to try and deter Russia?
Well, we need to see much more of the details of what they are going to look like. The frank reality is that Russian oligarchs who have got rich from robbing the Russian people and participating in Putin's kleptocratic regime make their lives and live lives of comparative luxury right here in the West. There are houses in Chelsea. There are super yachts that sail into our ports that are owned and operated by exactly these oligarchs. Now, if we finally see sanctions imposed on oligarchs who help prop up Putin that preclude them from doing so, I think that would be a severe disincentive for Putin. He is beholden to these people who prop him up in exchange for their lives of luxury. And if they were to see that their wealth was now in jeopardy because of Putin's actions, I think they would be coming down on him very quickly indeed.
Now, Boris Johnson is taking a pretty strong line against Putin, against Russia's military build-up, but some European leaders are being less bold. Just in the last minute of the programme here, Sam, what more can the UK do to try and chivvy on the European leaders to match us?
Yes, well, Europe has shown itself to be a pretty shambolic organisation. Germany in particular is so beholden to Russian gas that it has gone beyond appeasement to actively enable what Russia is doing. The UK has got relatively little it can do other than to show Europe up. But I think this just shows that those who denounce Brexit as Britain retreating into its shell, just how wrong they were. The UK is stepping up to lead. Europe is doing whatever it takes to preserve its economic well-being. And, I think many people have got eggs on their faces who were long saying that the UK would be seen as a joke on the world stage when now it's the EU.
Well, Sam, I'm afraid we've run out of time on the programme there, but thank you so much for your thoughts there. We really appreciate them. Up next, it's the weather, and then to the point with Nana and with Mercy. See you tomorrow.
Good morning. Pretty windy again today, but it doesn't feel as cold. Quite mild out there, especially this morning. A lot of cloud around, and for some, there'll be a bit of rain around as well, mostly being caused by these weather fronts as they trickle southwards. This area of low pressure, though, the isobars are squeezing together around it across the far northeast. So although it's not as windy as the weekend, there is still a potential for those winds to cause some disruption today across the northeast of Scotland, gusts of 50 miles an hour, maybe 60 to 65 around coasts across the far north. Elsewhere, yes, quite breezy, certainly across the south, but predominantly cloudy. Windy with rain at times for northwest England, Northern Ireland. Some sunny spells across eastern parts, but in that northeastern corner, as I said, not as windy, but still feeling cold in the wind here. But elsewhere, temperatures well above average and quite a bit higher than yesterday, 11 to 12, maybe 13 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll keep some rain and drizzle across the Midlands, Wales, and returning to Northern Ireland. Still some showers across the northeast, but the winds will be easing here through the evening as well. Clearer skies for a time could allow temperatures across the northeast to drop close to freezing, maybe